Hello, thank you for joining in once again. Have you ever experienced a weird behavior with if else? I mean, when you do a comparison in if else and it returns you an incomplete answer or an incomplete vector instead of the complete one. Let's find out why that happens. So the background of this video is a Stack Overflow post which I will link down below in the description. Basically, there are two lists in that post. Let's name them as list 1, which has vectors in it, so this is list 1, and then we have list 2, okay. So list 1 is a list of length 2 which has two components x and y. X has 1 to 3 vector and y has 4 to 6 another vector, whereas list 2 is the same except it also has another component which is z, which is from 7 to 9 another vector in there. So now we want to select a list which has higher number of sublists in them. What do I mean by that? So here if you see in list 1, you'll see that it has got two sublists in them, which is x and y, right? And in list 2 we have got three sublists, which is x, y and z, right? So now we want to select one of these lists, either list 1 or list 2, based on its length. So if list 2 has higher length, then we select list 2, or if list 1 has higher length, then we select list 1. So in this example, as we can see, list 2 has higher length than list 1, hence we will select list 2 here. How to get the length of the list? It's easy, by using the length function. Length list 1 gives us 2, makes sense, and length list 2 gives us 3. Okay, so this is correct. Now we want to compare these lengths and select the list which has a higher length. So let's say we try to do this with an if else statement. How will we write this? If length of list 1 is greater than length of list 2, then select list 1, else select list 2. This does make sense, right? If length of list 1 is greater than length of list 2, then select list 1 or else select list 2. Okay. Now let's see what output do we get after running this. So we get 1, 2 and 3. However, in this case we were supposed to get a list 2, and list 2 is basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, 8, 9. We should get all these values. Instead we just get 1, 2 and 3. Why is that so? Do you have any idea about this? Have you experienced something similar? Logically this code does make sense, but still we don't get the expected output here. We do get an incomplete one. So let's find out the reason behind it. Like most of the answers, this answer is also hidden in the documentation. So this is the documentation for if else. Now let's go into the value section here. So it says that it returns a vector of the same length and attributes including dimension and class, as test, and data values from the values of yes or no. Now read each word carefully here. Now what is test here? A vector of the same length and attributes as test. So let's look here. What is test? Test is the condition that we are checking. And what is the condition that we are checking here? This is the condition. Length list1 is greater than length of list2. Let's save this in a variable. Call it test. Okay. Now what the documentation says that if else returns a value which is of the same length and attributes as test. So the important word here is of the same length. What is the length of this test value that we have? Let's check with the length function. So if we do length test, we see the length is 1. Now the yes and no part which we are passing here, yes and no. In our case, yes is list1 and no is list2. So what it does, what is the length of list1? We already know length of list1 is 2, whereas length of list2 is 3. Now because length of test is 1, it returns output of the same length. Now list2 is supposed to be our output, but it has length 3. But since our length of test is 1, it also returns only output of length 1, which is just this. Is this clear? Why do we get output as only 1, 2 and 3 here? Now how can we get the complete output? Note that if else is actually used for vectors, and here test value that we have is not a vector, it's a scalar value, it's only value of length 1. When you have a single scalar comparison, it is better to use if and else. What I mean by that is use this code instead of the previous one. When you use this, it correctly gives you list2 value with all of its components. So now note that we are using here if and else and not if else like previously what we did here. So it's important to understand the difference and to know when should we use if and else and when we should use if else. Let's take another small example just to make this concept clear. Now we don't want any condition. Let's say I'm just going to use true as a dummy condition here. Okay, now any guesses what this should return? If you'll notice, this is same as our previous case where instead of just true, what we were using was length list1 greater than length list2. The length of that previous condition was also 1. Here also the length is 1. And the output that we'll get is 4. Because this is true, it returns the first value from 4, 6. So from 4, 5, 6, it returns the first value. Now if we make this as false, it will return output as 8. That's correct. And what will happen if we use a vector here? This will return a value 8 and 9. Again, note that the output from if else is going to be the same length as the test value, which is here length of 2. So we get only first two values from 8 and 12. And just to make it more interesting, let's add true here. And now what would be the output for this? So this false would give us 8 value and this true would give us 5 value from this vector. So we'll get 8 and 5. Again, if we want a complete vector as output, like 4 and 6 and 8 and 12, we should use if and else separately. So if true, 4 6, else 8 12. So you get the complete vector as output when you use if and else separately for scalars. So basic rule of thumb that you need to remember is whenever you have condition to check of length 1, you should use if and else separately and not if else. I hope this was something fun and interesting for you to learn. Let me know in the comment section if you have any feedback or suggestions, or if some part of the video was unclear. Thank you for watching. See you soon.